Robschild here. Hi everybody. We're going to be covering chapter 4 today of security analysis. Two disclaimers: nothing I say in any of these videos is investment advice, and I am in no way trying to replace any content of this book. It is meant to supplement it, encourage you to buy it yourself and rate it along with me, and discuss it with myself and others in the comments below. So let's dive right into it. Chapter 4, the title is Distinctions Between Investment and Speculation. This is a very popular area for people to be discussing, and there's a lot of heated debate as to what is considered investment and speculation. Probably the greatest one that you hear today and that is mentioned in this chapter is the fact that speculation and investment seem to be better defined in retrospect. It's easy to see what was a good investment. Microsoft in the 90s, for example, was a very good investment, even though at the time a lot of people saw these, computing machines as, just like a speculative nonsense. And so there goes, the main definition that we still use today that kind of differentiates between the two. If it was successful, it was a good investment. If it wasn't successful, it was a bad speculation. That kind of sums up how most people define those two things today. Like I said, it's exactly what he says in the book. This was almost 100 years ago, the same thing. So I want to try to go through the main points of this as quickly as possible. I'm trying to make my videos more condensed and get to the point of what's in this chapter and how it relates to today and what we can learn from it from a modern perspective. So he says, okay, it's important to know if you are speculating or investing. If you know you're speculating, make sure that your speculations are justifiable. I think that kind of goes without saying to some degree. He goes on to talk about how in this period, a lot of people defined investment as investing in bonds and a speculation by investing in stocks. And that's not really true, and there's not really any good way of defining any particular security as being specifically an investment or a speculation. But he does, in the chapter, come up with a way of defining the difference that I think is very good and still applies today, and is still ambiguous enough to be open for the interpretation that is needed in order to distinguish between those two ideas. So what do we mean by all of this? Well, for example, the Treasury bond, one of the most secure securities in the world. You buy the Treasury bond, it pays you a certain amount, and you get the principal back. Pretty much guaranteed by the full faith and of the United States. This is a guaranteed return. So how could that possibly be speculative? Well, if you don't know, when you have a Treasury bond, the price of it can go up and down over the course of that 30 years, especially when it's a new issue, when it's has a lot of time left on it. If rates go down, then the value of your bond goes up because the price that it costs to get the same return on a new bond is now higher relative to what your bond is already paying out. And so the value of your bond goes up. And so people can even speculate using T-bonds. And equally, you could argue that stocks are not speculative at all when perhaps put into a basket of stocks. So if you own one of these ETFs that's like, the world index, all stocks, you just own all of them together. I think there's a few like that out there. I don't remember the ticker symbols. But anyway, the, that's not so speculative. If you own every stock in the world, a little bit of it, it's not very speculative to think that there's a risk of all business going to zero forever. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous unless it's like outside of a doomsday scenario where the whole world shuts down and, the only valuable thing at that point is ammo. Some people talk about gold. Anyway, I digress. Let's move on. I said I wanted to get through this quickly and efficiently, so let's do it. So he has some charts through here. If you look on page 49, going through kind of traditional ways of defining the difference between investment and speculation. And he kind of argues against every single one of those, sort of, going back to the ambiguity of the difference between investment and speculation. One quote I like in here was, wouldn't it be wholesome to go back to the idea that if your goal is income, that's investment, and if your goal is capital appreciation, that's speculation. But like I mentioned before, it doesn't work that way. And, even if you have an interest-bearing, not really interest-bearing, if you have a dividend-bearing stock even, a company that's earning money, they don't always pay out all of their monies as income to the stockholders. They oftentimes, nowadays, they use it largely for buybacks, which give the capital appreciation, but, and it gives them credit towards their ownership of the stock. So, so income as their central motive versus capital appreciation as speculation. It's a grand idea, he says, but it doesn't really work. Let's move on. He criticizes the idea, even back then, and it still happens today, of the idea that the current price of a security is the sole measure of value it has. In a way, it does, and so you have all these day traders that use the chart action and volume profile and all these different metrics to determine the value, and it is the value. Day to day, it's what you can buy it for, it's what you can sell it for, but he encourages to look past that as best you can. Well, not past it. He says you do have to use it. Hopefully we'll get into that in a little bit. I wanted to share a quote from page 63 that says his conclusion about how to best define investment versus speculation. And they say, an investment operation is one which, upon through thorough analysis, promises safety of principal and a satisfactory return. Operations not meeting these requirements are speculative. So, the promise of safety of principal and a satisfactory return. And so a big part of how he defines what an investment is the safety of it, the safety of the principal. So even if the price of it were to, in extreme circumstances, go down by 50%, there's enough safety where it doesn't matter. You can hold on to it and the payments are still going to come. The value of the underlying security hasn't really actually changed, even if the price of it goes down. That said, like he says in the chapter, when you buy something that is overvalued or even valued at a fair price and then goes down in its principal value, well, that's obviously not that's not safety of principal. So, principal being the amount that you paid for it. And I think that can apply to buying a stock too. You buy a stock for $10. What's the chances of you getting that $10 again in the future, being able to sell it? How safe is the principal that you put in? All right. And he discusses that. I encourage everybody to just read this chapter. Obviously, this is, he goes through a lot of details about how he defines those terms in the quote. And it's important to understand what he means by all those terms. I'm going to move on. One of my favorite quotes in the chapter says, he's referring to popular stocks. And this could be said, well, today about like Google, all the FANG stocks, for example. He'd love to criticize the FANG stocks. Let's read the quote. And I quote, "In our opinion, the great majority of common stocks of strong companies must be considered speculative during most of the time, simply because their price is too high to warrant safety of principle in any intelligible sense of the phrase." And he puts a warning, they put a warning that Wall Street Opinion doesn't agree with them on that point. And so I really like that phrase because it lets you realize that, and you can look throughout time too. You can look at companies that were supposedly a sure thing and that went bankrupt and people lost everything. And, this is, of course, going back to, qualitative versus quantitative data. So the quantitative data basically not being, if it's not priced in as well as the qualitative data. When the qualitative data is giving too much of a premium, he sees that as a problem and he doesn't want any part of that. And, I think part of this journey of investing is obviously to try to beat markets, right? You want to beat the S&P 500. And how do you do that? Well, that's largely what this book is about. Like we've mentioned in the last chapter regarding sources of information. I gotta pause this for a second. All right, so regarding sources of information, obviously, when it comes to the popular stocks, this is, a lot of the information that these stockholders and stock buyers have is through popularity, and this is not necessarily a very good source of information. In fact, probably the opposite is true. And, he quotes here, there's a quote here, "An investment operation is one that can be justified on both qualitative and quantitative grounds." So on the qualitative side, popular stocks actually lose their luster because, here's something to think about. As popular as a stock can get, well, what's stopping it from having a severe discount in light of bad news? And that's exactly what you see. It's exactly what you see all the time. Whatever the people on TV are talking about does affect the price of stocks greatly and unjustly. It's like often unjustly, and so you want to be careful where you get your information from. And that's how we kind of connect the last chapter to this chapter. So safety of principle, you know, again, you get safety in groups of securities. And then he talks about how a lot of securities can have investment merit at one price but not another. And so, and again, that's making sure that you're using sufficient quantitative data in your decisions to buy and sell securities. And you really have to read the chapter. He goes into detail about all these different examples. Very, very well organized, a lot more organized than any of these videos. But yeah, I'm trying to open the conversation here for people, and also, you know, yeah, so we can all maybe learn a little bit more about all of this. I'm at the end of my notes. One important part that I wanted, a few important notes to finish up. He says, you know, a lot of times people think of a stock as an investment or a speculation. And he says, well, no, you can actually divide that up. You can say, you can own a stock and understand that you're paying a certain amount of it as an investment vehicle, and maybe there's also a premium on top of that that's a speculation vehicle that you want to be a part of. Certainly a company like Nvidia, which I keep bringing up in a lot of videos, with a PE ratio of 206, the premium that you're paying on speculation is huge compared to the investment portion that you're paying for. And so I'm sure he would advise greatly against investing in that company at this moment. He might even suggest shorting it. He does say as well in this chapter, for example, when something clearly has more value than it's worth, then it just makes sense to sell it and buy it when it's a more reasonable price. You know, and I like to equate it to, for example, I own a Nissan Rogue. If the price of Nissan Rogues were to, for some reason, triple over the next 3 months or year or something, do you think I'm going to hold on to my Rogue and say, oh boy, I'm rich now? No, I'm going to sell that thing. I'll be the first one to sell. I'll sell it before it triples. I'd sell it after it rose by probably only 50%, because I know that it's not worth that much more. I can use that money to buy a better vehicle, you know, in place of that vehicle. And, you know, and like I've mentioned also in some of the other videos, you know, at least the other editions maybe of this video, I don't know. But I see myself as someone that thinks a lot like these guys in terms of value. You know, I'm the one buying the Xiaomi cell phone for $200 that has the same power and life and screen quality and camera quality as a $1,500 iPhone. Same with, like, if I go to the grocery store and I see the popular brand of butter is 5 times the price of another butter and they have the exact same ingredients, I'm not gonna pay a premium because of popularity. I'm the guy that's gonna be buying the whole box of the cheap butter. And then if I have guests, I'll just use a marker and write a different name on it, right? I don't know. So, but anyway, he sees investing in this way, and I'm excited by that because it's already naturally the way that I think about a lot of things as far as how we should be valuing things. I'm going to do a quick pause. One other part of this chapter I want to mention is at the end, and then I'm just going to sum up the main takeaways of this chapter. So he rips into GE and says he's sorry, but he's not sorry. And apparently, he saw something coming that no one else did, and he's proud of it. And it's funny how he discusses it in the chapter. You'll have to read that part of it. The two biggest takeaways, like I said, I'm going to do a quick summary, is intelligent speculation versus unintelligent speculation on page 67. Intelligent being the taking of risk that appears to be justified after carefully weighing the pros and cons. Unintelligent speculation, risk taking without adequate study of the situation. So, careful where you get your information from. Be smart about what you buy. Try not to lose your principal. Seek safety and a good return. And in his words, once again, the biggest takeaway from this chapter regarding this subject is that quote on page 63. I'll quote it again. Quote, "An investment operation is one which, upon thorough analysis, promises safety of principal and a satisfactory return. Operations not meeting these requirements are speculative." And with that, we have chapter 4. And that's all I'm going to talk about today. I hope that you enjoyed this video and this chapter, and I'll see you next time for chapter 5. Rob's Child.